Veterans for Peace Forum. I want to welcome you to our program and to remind you that we have this program on once a month, the fourth Saturday of every month. I want to also thank my producers, Kelly Labonte and Jim Lockhart, who have been here with me for almost 7 years now, or 6 to 7 years, as we've been producing this program with veterans issues and community issues that affect everybody in our local community and around the world. Today's guest is a young woman who I met. I saw her speak at Portland State a few years ago. Dave Rovix was playing music. She were talking about a trip to Gaza. And then just back here in March of this year, we had a book tour by Bill Dietz called Freedom Sailors. And it was about the Free Gaza activists herring tails on the high seas on a mission to Gaza. So it was, and Aaron, I put up some information there that I think was wrong in the beginning, so you were trying to correct me. First of all, I just wanted to say, Aaron, you're an acupuncturist and an activist working with, an activist on these kinds of issues. Also worked with the Oregon College of Oriental Medicine as an acupuncturist, right? And for the Native American Rehabilitation Association. And then I was putting up, you were, first of all, so you went to Gaza, but you had actually gone to the West Bank. Yeah. Can you explain a little bit about that?
Yeah, I went to the West Bank in December of 2008. It was for acupuncture training. I was working with an association there that helped treat victims of torture, and I was teaching the professionals that do the therapy with the clients or patients there how to incorporate acupuncture into their treatment modalities. And so I had gone to do a follow-up training because there was a person I was working with at the time, and do a couple other trainings in different areas like IDA camp, and I also got hooked up with a hospital in Jenin. And so it was just a way to introduce ear acupuncture or auricular acupuncture for the treatment of PTSD, which many people over in the West Bank and various places around the world suffer from due to obvious causes. But I went there, I arrived December 25th of 2008, and I made it to Bethlehem that night. So I got to see Bethlehem on Christmas, and I got set up with in the camp that I was working in the next day. And then the morning of December 27th, so 2 days after I arrived there, was when Israel started its campaign of cast lead against the people of Gaza, and it was the largest death toll in one day.
What do you mean by cast lead?
Cast lead. Cast lead was the operation that...
The name of it?
The name of the operation that Israel had decided upon. I believe it was supposed to be in retaliation for, breaking of the truce by Hamas. But yeah, that morning they bombed various parts of Gaza and killed, I think, over 600 people in a few hours' time. And that was the start of cast lead, which lasted for just over 2 weeks. Over that time period from 2008 into 2009. So I was there in Ida refugee camp doing trainings, and what I guess many people don't know unless you've been there is that when something like this happens, or when the community undergoes some type of trauma or a loss, everything shuts down for 3 days. And so obviously a lot of things had to get rearranged for what my trip was supposed to be, and it really opened my eyes to a whole other side of how people in various areas respond to that type of trauma. But yeah, so I was there doing acupuncture trainings, which resumed finally after the 3 days of mourning.
So you went through their ritual grieving process then.
Yeah, and with the community that I was part of, and they were very active in the community organizing around, protesting and combining with other communities in different areas to try to make their voice heard. And so I got to see a lot of like the underlying organization and how things happen quickly in response to things that happen on a daily basis there.
Well, I wanted to kind of go back a little bit here too. First, just for people to get to know you.
Mm-hmm.
So where'd you grow up at?
I grew up in Tampa, Florida.
Mm-hmm. And we talked a little bit saying that, I asked you, you'd been down to the Glades, and you said you loved going down there, right?
Yeah, I love all of Florida. I really like the environment there. I mean, unfortunately, the environment has been decimated over the past 10 years or so, but what's left of it is beautiful.
Yeah? Did you have hurricanes while you were there? And
yeah, for sure.
Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
So you lived through a bunch of those.
Yeah, I mean, luckily, where I was at in Tampa, the only one that I remember was when I was really young. The only one that really came through there was Hurricane Elena. But the other ones that touched down in other areas of the States, I wasn't really affected by. I mean, we would actually have surf parties where you'd go out as the hurricanes were approaching the coast. So, yeah, luckily I didn't.
And so, how did you come to Oregon?
Actually, through a circuitous route, down through New Mexico, up through Seattle, and then I found acupuncture was my calling, and I checked out different states and different areas that had schools available, and I marked off the ones that I didn't want to live in, and Portland became the top of the list. And so I checked out the school down here, and yeah.
Well, I've met a lot of acupuncturists and a lot of people that do alternative medicine, but I don't meet too many that have gone over to another country to practice and or train other people. What got you to even think about going to Palestine?
Well, I think one of the reasons I got into acupuncture, I had done my undergrad in microbiology, and I had always been interested in the sciences and healthcare, especially from various angles. First I wanted to be a doctor, and then I wanted to be a researcher, and then I realized I didn't like how Western medicine treated the body, and so I came over to acupuncture. But in that way, I think I'd always been aware that there's a lot of people. My first focus was on people in the United States, especially, indigenous populations that don't have healthcare access. So that kind of got my mind opened in that direction of providing healthcare where it's not available. And then I met somebody through school that was also interested in the same types of things, and he's the one who had gone over previously and done the trainings, and so that's how I got more involved with the Palestinian issue.
So I mean, you we got reacquainted here with this Freedom Sailors book tour, and now Bill, I always have a hard time with his last name. Dientz,
I think.
Dientz, yeah. Now, Bill also is an MD, and again, that idea of somebody that's in the health profession that wants to do something to help people, and they live in the science of reality. That these are physical things that people are going through, and at the same time, they're looking at the political situation between people. Here, they went all out in this almost impossible task to begin to create this idea of a flotilla and to get a boat, and all the book is incredible because you start to go through the story of all these people coming together to raise money and people being followed, and one of the gentlemen dying that had been working to raise money to get this, and they thought it was all going to fall through, and then they get out on the high seas, and the Israelis block off their communications, and they can't reach anybody, and they were counting on those communications if anything happened and a storm comes up, and now they're worried whether they're going to live or die just from the drowning if they get capsized, and nobody's going to hear from them. So, I mean, it's quite an adventure.
Yeah.
But then the courageousness of these people to continue to move forward, and there have been a number of flotillas. And what I've been looking at now, though, as if we look at the updates, is instead of going to Gaza, they're talking about taking Gazan goods or products out and going in the opposite direction from the Palestinian side from Gaza. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, definitely. The initiative is called Gaza Arc, or Gaza's Arc, and the web address is gazaarc.org. And the whole idea of it is that if you look at international laws, the siege on the Gaza port is illegal by every means. They don't allow fishermen to even go 6 nautical miles out. I think that's their regulation, and they oftentimes decrease that down to 3 on a daily basis for various reasons.
We were just reading a little piece here.
Yeah, completely. And but that happens like all the time. It goes back and forth all the time. So what's said in the public of what access they say that Gazans actually have is not accurate. And since the siege on Gaza happened from Hamas taking control, I think in 2007, I think we just read that too, a lot of products that are produced there aren't able to get out of Gaza to be sold, and they have to, a lot of times they'll sit just waiting to get out, and they rot in the process. They have a lot of like fresh fruit and herbs and other types of produce that is really good and could be sold everywhere, but Israel won't allow them most of the time to get out to actually sell it. So this initiative is helping get the produce, probably not produce because it'll go bad too
like
too
olive
much,
oil
but yeah, like olive oil, embroidery, other products that will help the trade in Gaza, because the whole idea for a long time has been that we shouldn't be supporting aid to Gaza and Palestine. We need to be supporting freedom of movement and trade, etc.
I like how this one article says, bringing Gazan goods to the world.
Yes.
It's not just that they've been denied, but we have been denied,
Completely.
We've been denied the products of people that wish to share with the rest of the world.
And amazing craftsmanship.
There you go.
Yeah.
You might explain a little bit to people the difference between Gaza and the West Bank and what that means, because you were how long in the West Bank?
I think just over 3 weeks.
3 weeks, and what that means to people when they...
There's certain similarities. Obviously, they're both occupied territories, but the way in which they're occupied is very different. The way in which movement is restricted is very different. In the West Bank, there's 3 different areas, A, B, and C area, and that is a designation of whether it's run by Israel, Palestinians, or a combination of the two. And then oftentimes in between areas, especially even in between villages and cities, there's tons of roadblocks, so it's like thinking about going from, East Portland to West Portland and taking 5 hours,
right?
Due to having the circuitous route or having to be stopped every so often for checks. The other thing that's happening in the West Bank is settlements. Settlements are taking a large part of the land, and they expand all the time by slowly pushing in on the Palestinian territories around them, either by destroying their crops and their trees or by violence a lot of times. And so what you see is that all these places that are designated for settlement territory, the Palestinians aren't allowed to go across. They're not allowed to even enter that area. And so there's a lot of roads and other infrastructure that is used for settlers only.
Right.
And so it's another way that they impede the freedom of movement, etc. Also, a lot of people in Palestine or the West Bank have to travel to Israel for various things, work, etc. And the apartheid wall is obviously a huge border there, which they continue to grow and expand as much as they can. And when you look at the way in which it wraps around the lands of the West Bank, it takes up a lot of the water resources and the natural resources. And so that's just another aspect of it, So those are the main things when you're thinking about the West Bank, is that it's enclosed. They have to have special permission to leave at all. They have to have special permission and be checked to go even in between towns. Sometimes they can't for various reasons. They're constantly under watch by 18-year-olds with machine guns pointed at their head, laughing half the time. It's pretty demeaning in a lot of ways. And then they also have similar issues with getting their produce out and getting their goods out as well, because it has to be approved by Israel to get out, and usually they try to extend it enough to where they go bad or it can no longer be moved anyway. Whereas in Gaza, what's happening is it's almost complete lockdown.
Like an open prison.
It's an open prison, yeah. Many people have made that comparison, and it's very accurate. I have never made it to Gaza. I have tried various times, but have not for various reasons.
Weren't you trying to go in through Egypt?
I tried to get in through Egypt with the Gaza Freedom March. I actually tried to get in when I was in the West Bank. I had, in December of 2008, I had connected with a group in Israel who was actually trying to get medical supplies in there. And so we had tried to put together a little group to get in there, and it was denied. Like every time it's governments denying access,
right.
But like I said, I haven't been there personally, but I'm connected with many people who have been there and who live there now. And so I get to hear their personal stories, and I think that that's what's really just kept me wanting to be a voice and a witness for this, is that it's like these things are happening on a daily basis. And yes, we hear these stories every so often that gives us a glimpse as to what's going on, but this is a 24/7 reality for people, and so, yeah, it's a completely locked off area of land that is very tiny when you look at the actual dimensions of it. I can't remember, but it's very tiny. It's something like 40 miles by like 120 miles or something insane. Yeah. And there's like over 1.5 million people in this small area. And with that complete lockdown, there's a lot of goods that can't get in. So, because they're completely reliant on what they themselves can produce, as well as what Israel will allow to get through, a lot of times there's many shortages for basic needs like flour, electricity, gas, etc. A lot of people there are jobless because a lot of their infrastructure has been decimated by the constant bombings that happen, and once they get a chance to rebuild a little bit,
well, those constant bombings,
again.
Israelis would say, well, they've been, that some of Hamas's people or some other fringe group has lobbed a missile in and it's retaliation. And how do you address those issues? And
it's a very commonly stated argument. Yes, everybody has to have their own views on that, but personally, it's null and void. It's homemade rockets that very rarely get to an area of population, let alone densely populated. Like, they don't really. It's amazing because you hear about this all the time. Well, Hamas lobbed 4 rockets into Israel today, and Israel retaliated by bombing a city. And it's like, when you look at the actual numbers of it, usually, and I'm not saying there's any excuse for any type of violence, obviously.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, if somebody died, and that needs to be taken into account, and it's very sad and tragic on either side.
Right.
But usually when you're looking at the numbers, the reports from the statistics of the rockets that Hamas send into Israel gets counted in people who are, have PTSD now from the trauma of hearing a bomb that fell next to them. When you hear the numbers in Palestine, it's how many people died and how many people have been seriously maimed. So I think that when you look at the firepower involved in either side, you'll see that retaliating with, the third largest army or whatever.
Like me shooting bottle rockets at the U.S. Army or
yes,
something.
Exactly. And them coming back and saying, well, we were just retaliating. And it's like, you have to look at, it just seems like it's...
Well, for most people, I know that it's always been a difficult issue, especially people, I'm with Veterans for Peace, but I've never considered myself a pacifist. I understand that I do believe in self-defense, and if you put up against the wall, if you're in these situations, I mean, we as the U.S. is one of the biggest, as far as I'm concerned, terrorists in the world. We go around and literally say who should be your leader in your country, and we'll overthrow that regime to put people in place that we want there, so that we can control either the resources or just the power of government in a certain area to buffer somebody else. Whatever the reasons they do it, is that they will use military power to do that. Even trade deals that are going on, let's say with Asia right now, with around Korea and South Korea, North Korea, to block off China, is that they're going to working with Japan and Australia and other little countries around there to put up naval blockades in various areas to sort of pressure and then say it's all Korea's fault, North Korea's fault, and they retaliate at various times and shooting off a missile, and they become belligerent. Well, they're belligerent.
Right.
Well, when you're if somebody came into my house and took over it, you don't expect me to fight back, Right. I mean, there is something about that. If you're trying to build a relationship, true relationship and peace, then you're going to put down the guns. You're going to begin to start saying, we got to start somewhere. We got to have real peace that's going to be built, oftentimes through trade.
Yeah.
At least allow people to be able to survive. And as those doors open up, more people actually become friends because they're doing business with each other.
Exactly.
And or exchanging knowledge, education. Right now, I should say, I wanted to just add a little quote here. We can put that quote up. One of the reasons we're doing this, a program like this, and you're out there speaking, I put this up on Facebook, but question was asked, but what about the secret I bear? I asked. To tell it to the world, he advised. And that is what I am, and that is what I'm doing. That's what I'm doing, said Emily Habibi. Well, that's the whole thing. We have a knowledge of, you witness something, and you can't, a lot of people go places, they see things, but they never speak out.
Right. It's
a secret they hold in their heart. They know that there's something wrong. I think that's what Veterans for Peace do. The veterans have seen war, some from World War II to the present, and these people come back and somehow, sooner or later, they can't hold it all in.
Yeah. And
they have to tell that secret to the world. And one way of doing it is to have alternative media so that we can have that available for people. And I want people to remember that we're on here every fourth Saturday of the month to try and raise these issues for people to to understand.
Yeah.
In like you said, when people want to know more, is there a place for them to go to get more information and learn more?
Oh, definitely. I mean, there's a ton of websites. The most popular, well, hopefully it's popular, in the States, I think is called If Americans Knew. That's a great website. It has a lot of statistics that people just don't realize the actual facts and the numbers of what's going on there. Then if you also want to look for, things that are actually coming out of the area, there's one called 972 magazine, I think, .org. You'll have to look it up. It's 972. That's the international code for the West Bank and Palestine. And it's more, like daily stories. So it gives it from like a little bit different perspective than what we're going to hear in the mass media. There's a few different outlets. There's local groups that have a lot to do with the Palestinian issues. Like here in Portland, there's OFFER, which is Americans United for Palestinian Human Rights, and then there's SUPER, which is the student group. And so it's really just about getting involved, looking for alternative media sources. But those are the two best ones, one from Palestine and one from the States, I think, that would get people started in a good direction.
So they can learn and understand more of what's going on. Yeah,
because, I mean, like what you were saying, one of the things about the whole discrepancy in, military and stuff like that, and the whole idea of using self-defense as the justification for doing such horrendous crimes is if we're going to talk about self-defense, you have to look at both sides of the story.
Right.
You know, and anytime you look at any conflict or anything that's going on, if you don't understand it and you don't try to look at both sides of the story, I don't feel like you're, you know, well informed. And you really have to look at both sides of the story to understand what is meant by those words. Because if you want to talk self-defense, you know, Palestinians have been pushed off their land, and, you know, I mean, it's the same thing like what you're saying.
Right.
That happens everywhere.
It does.
You know, we go in there and we push, and then we say, how could you fight back? We were just trying to steal your land and kill everyone.
And that's the story of blowback. You know, you cannot. Why do they hate us? You know?
Exactly.
They constantly. But there's and the thing is if you continually to oppress people, people are going to fight back. I mean, I brought in the New York Times, and we were looking across there, and we're seeing Brazil is rising up. We have Turkey rising up. We still have things going on in Egypt.
Syria.
These kind of actions keep rising all across the world, and people are going, "What the hell is going on in this world?" You know, well, something is not working. The way the system, the world economic powers have been ruling the world, is failing, and that failure is they want to solve the problem through austerity. They want to solve the problem through telling each country one by one that you have to give up the social programs that are there for people. I just saw an article by Noam Chomsky, and just a little excerpt that I was reading. He began talking about the idea that all these sort of colonial borders, these artificial borders, are breaking down.
Yeah.
And that it may be in the future we won't even have nation states. It's a long ways off. And what would that mean in the world? You know, that a Palestinian wouldn't have to go to Israel. I mean, you wouldn't be going through these border checks. Italians, does it stop right at the border there that you're no longer going into Austria or some other place? You know, you have all these different things that we talk about. I know when you just go from here, if I'm going from here to Washington, I hardly even think of a border, you know?
Yeah.
But it literally is considered a border, and there's a state and a different government there.
Right.
So right now, we might be talking more about regional areas, people to organize themselves. I don't know what's going to happen in the future. I never really believed in states. I'm not a nationalist. I read a history on nations, and like even in Italy in the beginning of trying to bring people together. Well, they went to war with each other to fight for those boundaries and that identity, and they forced people into one language and all of these things as a part of it. But learning a history of people and culture is pretty important for all of us from all over. I know that we just had Moji Agha here he's from Arizona, but he's Iranian, who was talking about Mossadegh, the legacy of Mossadegh. And what Mohammad Mossadegh was a prime minister who elected to Iran. And there's a great book out there. You want to know more. I think this book is a quintessential book to pick up because it just came out and very definitive. It's called The Coup, 1953, the CIA and the Roots of Modern U.S.-Iranian Relations by Ervand Abrahami. And and it should be. I got it at Pal's, but I think we were talking with people afterwards. One thing would be nice to get is a group of people just do a reading.
Yeah.
You know, just I didn't want to organize it, but I read the book. But actually, it might be not just one book, but a number of books to look at. I just saw the movie Dirty Wars, which is Jeremy Scahill's book. He wrote the book. He was here. It's called Dirty Wars, The World is a Battlefield. And he was here at Pal's recently, and now we just watched the movie that came out, the documentary came from the book, at Living Room Theater last night. And It's an extraordinary film, and I think it's going to be there for a week at the Living Room Theater. I think people have an opportunity to go there. But you'll see how our invasion into Afghanistan and Iraq and what these drones are doing to people in various countries. What does it mean to lob something into basically in some rural areas, just a family a wedding or a funeral, and to turn everybody into a terrorist under the age of, if they're under the age of 70 to age of 14 and up, are all considered legal targets.
Yes.
This is insane. I mean, this is something that doesn't make any sense. He also talks about, of course, the hit list that Obama has even on American citizens in Yemen, the recent ones, Anwar al-Awlaki and his son, that were killed. Two separate incidences. The son had nothing to do with the politics of his father, and the politics of his father, he still had a right to criticize. They never tried him, and we have this kind of right. There's a lot of things that are shaky in our society right now, and I mean, we just had Edward Snowden releasing the NSA secret gathering and exposed them, and he was working for a private contractor, and he's really they just indicted him.
Yep. Yeah. And I mean, for Cheney to call somebody a traitor is just
a terrorist,
kind of
yes.
And
then I'm wearing a Bradley Manley shirt, another soldier who released information of WikiLeaks. One of the battles. We don't even get to hear.
I mean, his trial's been going on now for weeks.
It's
and
in
it's
the
like
third week.
You have to dig for information about what's going on in it.
Right.
It's crazy. I mean, these are huge stories that have a lot to do with the public, and how our tax money is being used, how our, government policies affect other places, and we're being totally shut out from it.
Remember, they couldn't take recorders in.
Yeah.
And somebody snuck out one of the first hearings. But you're not hearing Bradley's defense, and he's not allowed to even bring certain witnesses in there to talk about motivations. Now, if you can't talk about motivations, it's just cut and
especially
dry.
when they can on one side.
Yeah.
It's the same thing where it's like, we're going to present our story the way that we want it to be fed into the public, and that's what you're going to have to accept because you're not going to be able to hear from the other side, And that's like a pretty common MO from our government, it seems.
Yeah, and I mean, the thing, people out there will say, well, you're criticizing your government, I mean, that's the idea of democracy, the right to be able to speak out, and we're doing it because we believe that this country should be better than what it's doing. I don't like I know people will say, well, you don't support the troops, you don't do this. Now, wait a minute. I think I support the troops better than most people because I want them to come home.
I care about them.
I care about them. I want them to come home. I want them to be taken care of. I want people not to go to war for corporate power. Yes. I want people to be prepared to defend their country if we're invaded.
Right.
But I certainly understand the people that fight against us we invade.
Yes.
And as a parent, and you saw these people's whose children have been devastated by war. When you look into a child's eye, you have to understand. How can we pretend that for some reason these people have no feelings, their kids don't matter, these lives are worth nothing, or at least one of our lives for 100,000 of theirs. I mean, this is just insane to me.
Yeah.
And we have to find some other way of people starting to understand what that means. I saw a quote from one of the newspapers. I can't remember. I did it online, but it said, "The truth has a tongue." I love that. It's the voices of people speaking out.
Yeah.
And I think it's so important for people to raise those issues. Another thing about Gaza, well, not just Gaza, but the whole conflict over there is that there are people, both Israelis and Palestinians, working together, and
Yes.
people think it's just like split, Israel, Palestine,
Right.
but there are people on both sides that are looking to come together for peaceful resolutions. In fact, on some of those Gaza trips, there were Israelis that were also supporting
Definitely.
those flotillas.
Definitely. Yeah, one of my favorite people in the world he's an ex-Israeli pilot, and he kind of, anybody who's Veterans for Peace, etc., would understand. He went through it. He saw it firsthand. He made his own decisions about it and realized, from another perspective than what he had been fed, what was actually going on. And now he's a very strong voice for peace, and reconciliation and how to work together. Yeah, and that's what we need more. And that's what's interesting, like what you were talking about with the breakdown of the nation states, et cetera, is I've been thinking that for, the past few years, that it's really come down to people versus their governments. The governments are no longer serving the needs of the people. And when that happens, there has to be revolution. There has to be not necessarily an overthrow, but like an overturning of the system, because it no longer serves its purpose.
And that's what even our Constitution says.
Exactly.
It's no longer serving you.
That's what's so funny about what's going on in this, not funny, but I guess ironic about what's going on in America right now is it's just like you're left and right trying to silence people for dissent, when that's why this country is what it is, and where its roots came from, for the most part, is people who saw an oppressive government, and so they wanted to make their own. Unfortunately, they invaded another land and took it over and decimated the people there.
Right.
Which we can't forget. That is kind of the seed of this country as well, and so maybe that's why it's so embedded in our political understanding.
Well, I
of
just
things.
posted something, also a quote by, and I probably won't say it correctly here, but by Paulo Freire, which was, and he's talking about oppression, and he's talking about, first of all, he's talking about oppression of I would say the somebody who's sort of what they would call class traitor, somebody who actually comes from the classes, the ruling classes, who sees the suffering of somebody else and wants to join and be a part of helping people. And he says this is a good thing, but they come with baggage, and that baggage is that oftentimes, they want to help those poor people, but they still, because they came from the oppressing class, they had the resources based upon the oppression of other people, and they're giving back what people should already have, and then he says, but that's still good. He recognizes, but it's not going to free people from their oppression. And then there is the oppressor who really joins in and sees themselves as a part of the movement, but still carries the idea that it has to, that the people just aren't smart enough or educated enough, and they got to help guide them and lead them. So that's another point. But he says the real person is when that person realizes that they too are oppressed, and when they understand that they're oppressed, they're working for themselves, not for somebody else. Not charity.
Exactly.
We're working to free each other. And so he had, this little quote was saying, the oppressed can never free the oppressor can never free the oppressed, but the oppressed can free themselves and the oppressor.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
I love that. It's always been since the days of the 1980s in the Central American conflicts. I had read that, and from his book, The Pedagogy of the Oppressed.
I love that book. Yeah, it's amazing. And that's a really good point. Just as the world is changing and perspectives are shifting, it's like we have to really see people for where they're at, and not through our own understanding of values and concepts of culture. And I think, like you were talking about, trade being one of the ways in which different cultures and countries can start interacting. Culture is as well. It's like just appreciating another person's culture and where they come from, and they do have different values and different ways of life, and that it doesn't have to fit into your probably very limited idea of what that has to look like, you know.
And I'm constantly learning, because I grew up very ignorant about a lot of things, and in fact school and high school were boring to me, you know. I mean, I probably had only 2 or 3 teachers that inspired me at all. And eventually, actually, if you're looking at Snowden, they're saying he was a GED. There's this huge character assassination on this guy.
It's insane.
But I think of myself, it kind of offends me, because I dropped out in my high school year and got a GED actually before my class graduated. I decided to do that, and then I went in the military and came back. When I came back, there was a real desire to continue to educate myself, and I went to community college using the GI Bill. I went to work, and then after a bitter labor struggle I was involved in as a union representative, ended up losing my job and decided to go back to school and basically started over with no. My GI benefits have been used up. So I went back and did, my undergraduate and my master's and a little post-bac for a little bit, and just couldn't get enough. Couldn't get enough, and when you leave school, it's not the end. That's what books are for, that's what research for. And there's no excuse, there's no excuse to not be able to find anything. I can Google almost anything in the world and find it, and then collaborate it with other information. So once you learn how to do research, you can find that out, almost anything you need to find out. But, think for yourself. Find the information, read it. The New York Times puts out some pretty good headlines and some of the information, but it's not the whole story.
Right.
The whole story is getting to know the people.
Yeah.
The whole story is reading something like
history.
The coup, the history, because understanding that history is going to help you really understand the context of it all. And then when I've been reading, I'm reading a lot of history on different countries. So I've been reading about Korea, about Iran, about Israel, about Latin America. These are all the things that I've been interested in for years. About Vietnam, which I served in, and I didn't know anything about that country. And I've got a book now about 1,000 pages that I haven't even started yet, because I've got to finish these ones. But each time I read something, I learn more about the culture, more about the history, more about the people, but I also see a pattern of not just the U.S., but these sort of colonial empires, how they invade one country and throw over one leader for another. They call for democracy, but when democratically elected people, whose very personas were one of peace, one of
and they
sharing.
wanted to help their people.
People.
That's the one thing that I think will get you taken out is if you want to really help your people and don't want to bow to, the other international powers that are trying to get you to do things in their way, and you're really looking out for your own people, country, etc., you become a huge target.
That is what has happened to most of the great leaders that we've heard about. And then there are those that succeeded by certain methods. When we look at Nelson Mandela in South Africa, we see a whole movement. But I just picked up an article here about the U.S. involvement in AFRICOM, and all the things that people worked hard to try and create. That country has been devastated for over the long period of time of taking out their rulers. You go back to the Congo and see what's going there. One of the places that has the most resources. And actually, the movie Dirty Wars, Jeremy does a little bit of work in the Congo and talks about it. So I think that's pretty important for people to look at. Or maybe I may be confusing something, because I just saw an interesting show. Do you know Anthony Bourdain?
Oh yeah.
The traveling chef?
I don't know him very well, but I know who he is.
Well, I saw this thing. He's doing this thing on CNN now where he goes traveling around the world. I forget what the little subtitle is. but he went to Libya, he went to the Congo,
Oh, wow.
and he went to Morocco, and he begins talking about a poet that lived there, and the sort of expats that are living there. And he had dinner with the expats as they tell the story of how this country is changing. And but he gives you a little bit of the history, a little bit of the politics. But in the Congo, decided he was going to go down this river, and I mean, they had no electricity. They had to actually kill the chicken and take it with them on the road. They got dangerous in certain little areas that he was at, but he began, telling you how he talked about King Leopold and the Belgians and then they took over there, and he convinced the world to give him the rights to Belgium, to the Congo, and made this his own little kingdom. But when you look at what he did, and he quotes Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness. So he brings the literature, the literature I read in high school, and it comes back to you. And people know Heart of Darkness. That was in what was that movie, the war movie?
Yeah.
Now
Apocalypse Now.
Apocalypse Now.
I was like,
the whole idea of Kurtz was the idea that he was, with all these skulls and all these things, was these sort of people in the Belgium Congo. That's where the whole concept comes from.
Wow.
So people take these ideas and begin, this was the beginning of actually the first human rights movement. There's a book called, I can't think. Oh, King Leopold's Ghost. Adam Hochschild, I believe it is how he says his name. He wrote this book on the history of the Congo, which tells that story. He talks about Conrad actually being there, talks about these various people that are speaking out, and he shows the devastation, but you read like a novel. So, for some people, history can be dry.
Yeah.
But if you read these kinds of books, it's like reading Michener or something. It takes you to a place where you can begin to not only see the characters they're playing. What I like about Hochschild is that he gives you both the people that were the oppressors, but he also the people that are the dissenters, and how the human rights movement grew up out of this. One of the first international human rights movement came out of Britain that saw what the King Leopold had done by cutting off hands of people if they disobeyed. If they had a bullet that they shot into the air, they better bring back a trophy. So they may have just shot at a bird or something, missed it. They take somebody's hand to prove that they had to use
power.
It. It's a horror that you think isn't going on now. We don't have maybe face-to-face, hand-to-hand situations. You've got terror from the sky.
Yeah.
You've got. I was just watching the movie, Oliver Stone's movie, W. George W. Bush, and it goes from the 9/11 to all these kinds of thought processes that he's going through. But the idea that they would be sitting around a table talking about, I'm going to go get Saddam, and I'm going to get him. He was after my poppy, and I'm going to kick his ass.
Which you would like to believe wasn't true, but
yeah. And he's got weapons of mass destruction, and I'm going to go after him. And so, and of course, you got Cheney right on, man.
Yeah.
Whispering in his ear like a little snake, that he was. Darth Vader that he is.
Well, it's crazy because that happens so much because, right now Obama is kind of in his own, sticky situation with a similar issue, where he's saying that there's these chemical weapons that have been used, but there's a lot of discrepancy in the information that they're presenting. And so it's like you have to question, is this a very similar pattern that we've seen again and again? It is. Except, I think that what I thought Stone was putting forward is that Bush was a believer. He was more isolated. At least that's the way the movie portrays him. Okay, and who knows? He was
was kind of a frat boy, a screw up all along. He had these psychological problems of trying to outdo his brother and get his father's approval and all these kinds of things.
Little man
Yeah,
issues.
yeah, little man issue. That's a good one. But at the same time, I think his advisors did manipulate him more.
For sure.
Obama is no idiot, I don't know. I shouldn't say it. Bush an idiot? Yeah, I think I am saying that.
We can infer.
I think I may be saying that. But what I do think is that Obama is somebody who has a great. He came from sort of the community organizer. He knows these stories from people's hearts. He's heard and listened to them. He came out of that sort of. His rhetoric tells you that he knows how people feel.
Yeah.
But he's going into this with an open mind, and he's doing the same criminal activities, and he's actually carrying out more than what Bush could have gotten away with.
Yeah, and that's what, in my mind, it makes it worse in some ways, because with Bush, you knew what you were getting.
Yeah.
Whereas Obama talks really pretty. He makes you believe certain things, but then when you look at what's actually happening, it's like there's no real change in policy. And the one thing that I think that we need to question is the influences of that level of the government.
That's right.
Because it's like when you're surrounded by people and you hear their stories, you work with the people. When you're removed from the people for so long and all you're hearing in your ear all day long are people who have, their own reasons for saying whatever they're saying, and, they have their own hidden agendas. That's where it's like you really have to see what that level of government has become.
And this is what is, I think, so interesting about Snowden and Bradley and the Obama administration and all this secrecy.
Yeah.
All these things that are being classified, and generally classified. These people are actually just getting rid of not top secret,
right,
but classified information, so you can't see what they're doing. A real democracy is about transparency. The idea that
which
we
was
continue,
something that Obama, I think, had promised.
That's what he promised. That's exactly right. Also, the idea of that when they consider we're at war. There's war on terrorism, but when you give up your liberties in the face of war, that's even. George Washington and a number of people have said that these are the things that we can't give up. This is what we fought for. We fought against another nation because of this, to become the country that we are. And here we're giving up. People are so willing to give it up. I think when you say that Obama, I don't think it's Obama. I think it's the administration.
Right.
But I think it's the American public. Because the American public, it is strange. When before the war, when Bush was there, we had millions in the street to protest the war. We had people coming out constantly to battle these ideas. But when their Democratic president came involved, a lot of people shut up.
Complacency.
And they first it was say give them time. If you criticize them, of course. There were racists that were criticizing him, but they tried to dump everybody into that category, which was not the case. You know? Then there are the idea that people now continue to say, well, he would have been better than somebody else.
It's always making excuses.
It's always the lesser of two evils, And I think that somehow we've got to get past that idea. So we've got about 1 minute left. I think that's why we're here to talk about. It's not just to criticize the government, but to say that we want a better government, and we're here to.
We deserve it.
We deserve it. I think the world deserves it.
It's a right.
The world deserves it. We have an opportunity to bring you into that conversation, and if you want to, know more about Veterans for Peace, you can always go to our website, and www.vfp72.org. Again, thank you very much, Erin. I wish we had even more time. It always runs out fast.
Definitely. Thanks,
Please
Dan.
join us again the fourth Saturday of every month.